YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, has been the world's premier youth organisation since its 1844 formation in London by Sir George Williams. Locally, it has long been accepted that YMCA was formed in 1906 by Fred Bacon, amongst others. But funding from Heritage Lottery has allowed research to be undertaken for this project that delves deeper into the history of YMCA in Grimsby and uncovers a further history that dates back to 1882. Documents stored at the National YMCA Archives in Birmingham at the Cadbury Research Library attribute the formation of YMCA in Grimsby to James Kirkby Rigall, a local grocer who founded the YMCA above his premises in the North East Lincolnshire town's Bull Ring. YMCA's story has been one of struggle, survival and faith, one that remains to this day and one that we talk briefly about in this film. From humble beginnings above a grocer's shop, through 2 world wars and a changing political environment, YMCA has always faced a struggle, whether it's finding properties or sourcing finances to keep supporting the vulnerable and needy young people of our communities.
There was always a struggle with funds. The local authority would provide some money, we would get some money from the government through the Housing Corporation, but it was always difficult to make sure that we got sufficient money in to keep going for another month. And we decided eventually that we would try and keep sufficient money to go 2 months and so on. But we always survived. Nobody ever went hungry. There was always food on the plate, breakfast. When I first started, we served a good breakfast, and then there was an evening meal. And so that was always well looked forward to by the residents. It was a struggle sometimes to keep residents. They would possibly get into wrong company and decide to leave. But we have had general secretaries, as they used to be called, who would try and keep an eye on them. So if they were moved on to alternative accommodation, somebody would try and find out how they were doing. And very often at the Christmas carol service, former residents would come along, and so that was good. That would be a plus. Struggling to fill the rooms sometimes, because we had to have criteria as to who was going to be suitable. We didn't have anybody on the staff highly medically qualified, so there would be some people we would love to have given accommodation to, but we hadn't the facilities. Certainly locally we'll not have many rich benefactors, so we are reliant upon the local authority and then government funding as well.
Okay, yeah, in a time of austerity that we are finding ourselves in now, a time where services that have previously been provided by local government, national government, are being stripped back, YMCA find themselves in a position where they are still continuing to try and provide those opportunities, those services. The development of YMCA in the next 5 to 10 years needs to move into the future, but it needs to do so with a clear understanding of its past. Its recent past has, I believe, become a pseudo non-governmental organisation. It's provided services that the government have needed delivered locally. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's important and that's right and that's fair that we do that, and we do that in a way that perhaps local authorities or governments or even private sector organisations can't achieve, because there is something of that, that belief behind it and that drive to go the extra mile, and it's not all about profit and it's not about trying to pay shareholders. But I do think the focus on contract detail and outcomes has probably taken away from that need for community to be involved and be engaged in the association. And if our name is to mean something, the A needs to mean something. What does it mean to be an association? What does it mean for people to associate with YMCA? And I think that's been lost in the last 10, 15, perhaps more years. Currently, we house 98 young people. Well, not just young people. 98 people. But we are therefore seen as a place where people come to when they're just in crisis. And actually, in some ways, we take some pride in that, because actually YMCA do take those people when they're in crisis, when they have hit the end of the road, when they have hit rock bottom. We are there to care for them, to support them, to put some kind of community around them. But I think that needs to start from a much earlier age. I want the YMCA to be a place where actually if young people hit 16, 17, 18 and they do hit a point of crisis, they say, actually, I'm going to the YMCA because actually they're people that care for me and I've got a relationship with them. Whereas at the moment, I think people come to the YMCA because they're told to and they haven't got any other choice. And that's not what YMCA is about.
And I can remember other fundraising events, the exact details of it elude me now, but I remember there were a lot of things being organised the whole time. And
well, we were quite anxious to make people aware of the YMCA because it came to a period, because it's tucked away down here, that people didn't know anything about the YMCA and certainly didn't know that it was here. And we felt that there should be more recognition in the community about it. And we had Christmas cards made. Do you remember the Christmas cards? YMCA Christmas cards, do you remember those?
Yeah.
Which was one of the little things, to publicise everything. And at Christmas, we used to give everybody a little Christmas present, didn't we?
That's
do you
right.
remember?
No.
Yep.
No, you don't remember?
Not in my
We used to do
Christmas.
We used to do Christmas stockings, and
Yes,
they had
for
sort of
everyone,
shampoos and toothpaste.
Yes.
God knows what it is.
donated things to us in the past.
And we used to raise money for doing that, so that everybody had something on Christmas Day. They tended to be sort of functional things, but when you're young,
The Christmas Carol service. We had a Christmas Carol service every year. And do you remember that? Mince pies and a glass of sherry, I think it was.
if you were lucky.
Like our forefathers, today's struggle sees YMCA trying to secure the funds for its proposed new Trinity campus project, as well as engaging with and seeking the support of the local community to help those vulnerable young people in need. It is not by accident that YMCA has survived locally since the 1880s, but rather through the inspiring stories of individuals who have risen to the challenges that the organisation has faced.
When I first started, it was providing a home for people who, to a large extent, had got jobs. They were working on the Humber Bank doing apprenticeships. But then as times changed and the economic situation grew worse in this area, then it was certainly necessary for us to provide a lot of accommodation, and for many of the people sadly didn't have jobs. Building this place first of all, and then looking after people that didn't have homes. And that was particularly important when we created the foyer for people who were prepared to study, who didn't have the advantage of somewhere to study at home. And Lord Yarborough, he came to open it, and I remember going round with him, and everybody there was in their best kit. And we were talking, and he asked why they were there, and somebody had been thrown out, and her face was wreathed in smiles because she got somewhere, she was going to be looked after, and there were nice people around her. And my recollection is that from each year's intake, we would get somebody off to college or university. So I think that was probably the greatest achievement, the foyer. We did good works. We had people come round. There were talks given by outside people for the benefit of the residents. And there was a Christmas party. Particular highlight was, of course, the carol service, which we used to have probably in the week before Christmas. And I do know for a fact that many of the board members would put their hands in the pockets secretly and hand the money over so that all the residents, they had something of a Christmas present, because some of them may not have had anything at all. So that was a good thing. That was a good thing. I've seen the drawings and so on. I think it's terribly important that the present building is probably tired. So severe renovation is needed, because we still have a great place in this area, and there's an awful lot of work to do. And so if you're providing somewhere safe for people to work and study and live and play even, then that's all to the better. So I commend it to everyone and hope that money is put into it. There's always a huge benefit to one personally if you're giving your time and effort to a good cause. It's good for the soul, they say. Good for the soul.
Thank you.
We've spread out into 5 strategic areas: family work, support and advice, training, education, health and well-being, and accommodation. And those 5 strategic areas are the areas in which YMCA together across the country are saying, actually, this is what we stand for. Behind our very deep-held belief statements, so accommodation, we believe that everybody deserves to have a roof over their head. Everybody deserves to grow up within a loving community where it ties in with family work. And we've taken our Christian belief and turned that into some kind of real statements of what that looks like for now and in the 21st century. And I think for our YMCA, we want to be a youth-minded organisation. So not necessarily working with young people all the time, but having that youth mind, something of creativity, of belief, of excitement, of opportunity and hope for future. And that's got to be the core, I think, in terms of our name and where we go as YMCA into the future.
I think the plans for a new build are brilliant, and if we can pull it off, then great. If for any reason we can't, I think we just need to be continuing to work with clients how we're working with them now, getting them involved, making them feel a part of what we're doing, empowering them to go on and change their lives. I think we're doing good work there, so continue doing what we're doing. Be open to new ideas and new ways of working with young people.
My abiding memory when I arrived was that we were firefighting every board meeting. The financial situation was precarious. We were talking a few pounds up or down. And the difficulty came with the funding of the residents who stayed here, and the money came from their social security type sources. And as I remember it, the system was in transition. To start with, they got the money and they were supposed to pay us, and then it changed to if they could claim that benefit, then that benefit came straight to us. So that started to make life a bit better. But it was obvious to me that we were firefighting. We were just going from one crisis every month to another one, and there needed to be a fundamental reappraisal of how funding was going to work in the future. And we consulted widely through the national YMCA to various other welfare organisations in and around the county and in and around Grimsby and nationally. And it became apparent that funding of the kind that we felt we needed, could only be given if we were in partnership with other organisations. And so our work became strategic in trying to find other organisations with whom we could work because we had compatible aims, largely the same group of young people. But in order to get the funding, we had to have our aims consistent. And there were a lot of people who, I would say, being blunt, had great good intentions, but you had to turn it into something practical, because you had to go to somebody eventually and say, here's our business plan. What we want to do is this. And I'll give you an example. One of the partnership organisations we looked at was a single mothers and baby organisation. It was a national organisation. They recognised that there were a pool of young mothers in this area they had facilities provided by other welfare organisations and the council, but it was far from ideal. The YMCA had various young mother and baby centres around the country, and Penny and I went down to London to look at one down there. And we came back with a very clear idea of what worked. And we found a local developer who was prepared to sort of provide architectural services. So we designed a building which would come here. And if we redeveloped this building, we would put this building in because there was a need, there was funding. It was relatively short time. I think the girls were only there for 18 months, 2 years.
Yeah, that's right.
So there was a throughput, and we could see that there was always going to be a need for this sort of thing. And so that was you could then plan a financial income stream. And that was part of a wider development of the whole area down in Peaks Lane here, because as you can see now, it's been developed widely. But there was a sporting element to it. We were going to use the sports hall, which was one of the only couple of indoor sporting arenas in the Grimsby area. So it was popular for schools, it was popular for sporting organisations and some commercial organisations. And so we were looking at developing that because there was a need, and all of these things would benefit the residents here. And so that became the plan. But these things always take a long time, and in the meantime other organisations come and go and their funding sources dry up and whatever. So it was juggling balls in the air to try and hope that they'd all come down at the right time in the right place. There were two schools of thought. One was that we have this facility, we have this land, this is what we should do. The other school of thought, which I tended to align myself to, was I thought it would be better to have something in the middle of town, because that's where young people tend to gravitate. So I thought if we had something there. But we looked at premises like St James's Place, that's St James's Hotel. That was coming up for sale. We went around there. That would have been ideal because the partner organisations we were hoping to work with, they could have blended in. We needed to do very little with the accommodation side. It was a relatively modern hotel facility. Downstairs there were retail facilities which we could develop to community purposes as well as standard retail. The retail side would have given us another income stream. And so for all those sort of reasons, and we worked with a lot of estate agents and developers, and we looked at other sites as well, didn't we? We went all over the place looking at sites, trying to find common ground with other agencies. We also did a lot of work with the headquarters of the YMCA, because the problems that we were going through here in Grimsby were problems which every other YMCA in the country were going through, and it seemed logical that we learned of other people's mistakes before we made them, or the situation changed. And so they gave us a lot of time, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
They sent people down to help us do analysis and research and helped us to formulate plans. And we even had a government minister or his aide come down.
Yes.
Because we were going to make a bid for a lot of money, and he wanted a project that was in a box that he could give to his minister and say, here's a box. This is where we can put the money in, and we got very, very close to getting a whole lot of money for that for redevelopment.
Today, YMCA Humber is part of the world's oldest youth movement. But, like Sir George Williams and those few like-minded individuals who formed the National YMCA in 1844, how many of those who formed YMCA locally in 1882 would have believed that the organisation would still be thriving many generations later, despite all the struggles it has faced? Sir George Williams said that if men will no longer go to the churches and chapels, then churches and chapels will no longer feed the soul, then there must be something else.
So for George Williams, when he started off, it was for the drapery trade around him. You know, people who had moved to London who, you know, they were middle class men. You know, they come from well-to-do backgrounds, but here they were finding themselves in the middle of London, in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, where people were just being chewed up and spat out by the industrial machine. And he and his friends said, well, that's just not good enough. There's got to be more to life than this. And he says, there's a line that he says where if the churches and the chapel, so if men will no longer go to the churches and the chapels, and the churches and the chapels will no longer feed the souls of the people, then there must be somewhere else. And I think that was how the YMCA began for George Williams, was providing that community where people could belong, regardless of whether they believed in what was being preached from a pulpit or what someone said that you needed to believe in order to belong to this chapel or this church community. It was a case of, well, actually, you're good enough because you're a human, and we want you to belong. And when you belong, you'll find a space to contribute and to thrive. And perhaps somewhere down the line, you know, you'll consider what that means for you spiritually. But you won't do that in isolation of your mind and your body as well, and look at things as a whole person, and seek to provide that companionship through the journey of life.
And we used to arrange for priests to come along, not to preach, but just to be here, for the residents to see somebody wearing a collar. And I can remember when I first got on the board, I did arrange for the church times to be on the notice board, so that if anybody wanted to go to church, they would always be able to find a service. Very often we would have a cleric on the board. Bishops of Grimsby have been there in the past, and the priest from Humberston, I can't remember his name, he was Canon Oakes. He was a great supporter of the YMCA, and so there'd be possibly a slight reflection before a board meeting started. There'd always be a prayer before we started, which is a good way, I think, to start a meeting. We are a Christian organisation, but I remember when Roland Bellamy got me on board, he said, I know you're a Roman Catholic, Paul, there are many Church of England, but we've got 2 Jews on the board as well. We have a very, very broad entrance to our building. And I thought that was excellent. They were the brothers Goldstone, Danny and Percy Goldstone. They were tailors, lived on Cleethorpe Road, Grimsby. And they were good people to have, And the way I used to call it was I was putting back something into the system. Never got paid financially, but morally and so on, I certainly felt I was doing some good. And towards the latter part of my time here, my car knew the way, because I was either coming to a board meeting here or one at the hospice. So I was very gainfully employed in charitable work.
I was intrigued by the organisation. I didn't really know too much about it. I think externally, within Christian circles, YMCA at that point wasn't really seen as a Christian organisation. And actually that attracted me, because I wanted to find a place where actually my faith could work out in an everyday, but it didn't necessarily have to be pinned as, you know, there's a Christian who is working and doing his Christian faith stuff, or whatever baggage is tied up with people's perception of what Christianity is. But my life could continue to mean something. The Christian identity and how that works out in the 21st century is a common conversation that is going on within YMCA currently. I think it's something that YMCAs disagree about, but I always take it back to the parish basis, and the parish basis being the forming agreement that the YMCA founded itself upon. Now, even on the parish basis, it's steeped in very religious terminology that is difficult to understand, and needs to be something that almost needs to be deconstructed to understand its core. And when you deconstruct it and understand that actually what that basis is saying is drawing people together who are of like heart and of like mind to make a difference in the community. That's kind of what it talks about, wanting to further the kingdom of God. And when you unpack that, and I've done a couple of theology degrees to try and unpack that, but still haven't kind of come to an answer. I have more questions around that. I think that's always the way we study. But at its heart, it's about trying to live a life that makes a difference to other people, living a life that is self-sacrificial, that goes the extra mile, that cares for other people in the same way that you care for yourself, that puts other people before yourself. It's real countercultural stuff, and I think really interesting in the 21st century now, in times of austerity and where money is tight. Actually, that message I think is really key and really important now, because it's so easy to look at the other, somebody who's different to me, and think actually they're the issue, they're the cause of the problem. Be it immigrants, or be it people who are on benefits, or be it whatever it is that the media perhaps portray as being different to us. Well, it's all their fault. And I think that's where organisations like YMCA, but people with that Christian heart who want to live out what it means to be this term kingdom, living out a life that makes a difference to other people, can really step into the gap and care for people and love people and form community around them, where they can, as the YMCA's mission statement really says, belong, contribute and thrive. So I think now perhaps more than ever in the last 50 years, for example, that Christian heart of the YMCA is really important. And the parish basis is almost like our anchor. Perhaps the religious language doesn't really work for us necessarily today, and we have to try and work hard to understand what that means. But it holds us to our YMCA brothers and sisters through 170 odd years, that in each of their contexts have said, okay, well, how do we meet the need of the people that we see before us? Whether they're Christians or whether they're not Christians, whether they claim to have this faith or not, where is that thing that makes them the same as me? Just their humanity. That I think George Williams talked about a divine spark. What is it, that thing that makes them the same as me? And how do we meet that? And how do we meet that need?
It's everything to me. For me, it's anyone who comes through our doors, staff, clients. I feel a part of a massive family, and that's important to me. And I think it's really important to clients who come through and other staff members. I feel like we're a part of a big, big family.
Throughout YMCA Humber's history, individual and collective faith has been a source of strength in times of struggle. But in the 21st century, YMCA has found that it must revisit its founders' original Christian values to see how those ideals fit in today's world. From James Kirkby Wriggle in the 1880s, through the women of the Women's Auxiliary, to the staff and volunteers of YMCA Humber today, there are far too many individual stories to contain just in this A Rich History film.
A local solicitor in Grimsby, and I was with the YMCA movement for approximately 40 years. I think I started in 1968 or 69. Roland Bellamy, the then chairman, asked about 16 local businessmen to form a committee to look at the structure of the YMCA and to try and decide whether we should stay at Hennies Road or go somewhere else. It's the chance for people like myself to put something back into the system. Over the years, I've been successful as a solicitor and director of a number of companies, and so I thought to do some unpaid work would be beneficial to me, but also more beneficial to the people we were trying to help. Triumvirate of the three Rolands. Roland Bellamy, Roland Forge, the treasurer. He was company secretary of Hewitt's Brewery, knew a lot of people. There was a Roland Smith. He was Smith Wellborers. He knew a vast amount of people. And so they had, in their wisdom, chosen people to be on the board and the committees, local people who knew a lot about local businesses and where they could do some good work. And that's how we progressed. Talking earlier, we mentioned the Women's Auxiliary. And they were a group of ladies who one recognised by sight, but sometimes didn't know their names. My recollection is that it was Mrs. Tate, Gladys Tate I think it was, who was the person in charge, and she used to get the ladies making money for the sewing. She then organised them to do the curtains, and I know the curtains at Hennish Road and were here were all done by her ladies. And Mr. Bellamy always made a special mention. He always used to say, without the Women's Auxiliary we wouldn't be here. And so when I took over as president and was giving my speech, I always made sure that the ladies got their due recognition.
As YMCA, we want to move from what could be considered as a deficit-based model of work to one of an asset-based approach. So where people come to us in the past, we've been guilty of actually saying, well, these are the things that you haven't got. The glass is half empty. So how are we going to work with you to fill up what you need in order to begin moving into independent living or become the whole person that we think you should become? Whereas actually I think a far more effective and probably Christian, Christ-like way of doing things is to begin with their strengths and their assets, to actually see this person as an individual with strengths, so their glass is half full, and then to work with them to say, actually, how do we then begin to nurture and develop and grow the areas that you want to grow in, but based upon your strengths. So let's use your strengths to develop who you are and to get you to where you need to be and where you want to be.
And here's the story, and I knew that Uncle had been killed at the Battle of the Somme in the First World War, and that he'd been involved in the YMCA before then. In his will, he left, was it
£50, which is
£50, something, yes.
Something like
yes.
2,500.
That's right, yes, yes. So that was left in his will, and of course when he was killed on the Battle of the Somme, when he went over the top, so he was one of the younger brothers that were involved. Father was youngest of 10, so he was the youngest of them all, and Charlie was one of his older ones. So he worked on the docks with Sir John Marsden, who had a very big fishing fleet. And he used to go down, obviously, his parents were Bellamy Brothers Mineral Waters, so they'd obviously done very well coming up here. And he had a very flash motorcycle to go down the docks on, which always surprised me, because nowadays, in my day, you didn't take any decent vehicle down there because they got all the fish smelling. People had old cars, but the story doesn't relate, but we do know he had a decent bike, which was used in the films in the YMCA in the First World War. And he then obviously got involved and was from very early days in the YMCA. So when he was killed, and obviously Father felt there was a connection there, and he must have been asked to getting involved somewhat later. And so before in the 1930s, Father had his motor business, and he was asked to get involved with finding young people help when they stayed away from home, if they got a jobs out other parts of the country. So because of the connection with Grimsby, with the YMCA, he then felt that he'd made connections with other people around the country, and that we ought to really have something here to reciprocate for when people came to Grimsby. So the idea then came up of the old building there, of buying a building next door and expanding and starting off with a few hostel rooms, which became very successful, and then later on it was decided that really they needed something better, and they looked around for land of where they could build some new properties on. So the team there, the old team of the YMCA, got a lot of young people involved and said to them, how do we deal with this? and they came up with the idea that you know, we'd build a hostel if you could find the land.
To find out more about the stories of James Kirkby Riggle, Fred Bacon, Charles Bellamy and the many, many others who have formed part of YMCA's great history, please visit our website, arichhistory.com. Throughout the years, YMCA Humber has provided a number of services, from supporting and accommodating troops during both World Wars, to its housing projects in the current day, and a range of leisure and sporting facilities for the wider community.
And so we chose this area because it was on a bus route, and the land in question was owned by a chap called Michael Slight, whose family had been trawler owners. And Mr. Bellamy went to see Mr. Slight, and he wrote a cheque out. And Mr. Bellamy looked at the cheque, ripped it up, and said, "I want 3 acres," and that's how we came to be here.
YMCA, as we know from our history, has been in a number of different buildings around the town. We've been quite prolific in our spread. For the last 45 years, we've been here at Peaks Lane. And the building of Peaks Lane was a real challenge for YMCA. It caused a lot of financial issues. I think it's fair to say that it almost bankrupted the organisation for many years. YMCA was living hand to mouth in order to just get by. Our Peaks Lane building isn't fit for purpose. It does a job. It provides housing, but it doesn't transform lives as we would want it to. The building in and of itself, if we are being good stewards of the money that we have, well, actually it's not a good use of money because it costs so much to run this building. It doesn't care for the environment, the amount of energy that we waste out of our windows or it takes to heat the building. We have a joke in the winter that we have two temperatures with our heating is either on or it's off. We want to make sure that every moment of our customers' journey within YMCA is an opportunity for learning. And this building doesn't allow us to do that. So we want to flatten the place and we want to build a campus. So we want to move from having a hostel and to create a campus.
Well, I remember when at the camp at Hammerston, when my father took me along as a young boy. I think was it 1948? I can't remember what year it was. I would be 9. And he took me along, and there was this huge water tank, which was obviously used for during the wartime, which was then converted into a swimming pool. Then the camp really thrived. It was very successful for many years. And the buildings were built there, and I imagine there would be ex-WD buildings that would be used. And it was a tremendous activity for people to have a seaside place to go to. But, no, the YMCA was always very much part of our family and the knowledge of it, and trying to give other people advantages that we had, managed to do for ourselves. So it was very helpful to go and to have somewhere safe to go and stay when your young people went away.
Set up in 2010 with the support of YMCA England and the benefactor, which is Joe Wright, who wanted to give supported accommodation to people with offending backgrounds between the ages of 18 to 25. And it was certainly a new project for us, the YMCA Humber, very different to the foyer and Peaks Lane. So there's been a lot of learning curves in the early days to where we are now with the house. It's how we work with them at the community house, They're given the freedom to you know, learn to live, learn to get on with other people, to engage with staff members, you know, considering it's only 8 till 4, you know, the staff working hours, you know, we still go above and beyond and we're there if they need us, you know, after hours. But the support we put in place from there, you know, it's fantastic.
Coming down here when I was young, really. I think it was opened in 82. I didn't come down then. It was about, I was about 10, 11 years old, so it's been about 1983. Coming down off the train track. He's coming off there and come through the side gate. You could come through the car park, but I come through the side gate. And just used to rip around on there, but every now and again they'd have a big event on with a load of kids on the special racing bikes, which was good. I hadn't seen a racing bike before, really young. But these were all geared up, helmets on and all the sponsors and everything. And they had all the people there and cameras and everything. It was a really big event at the time. And it happened every now and again. But my thing was just learning on the jumps, you know. First time I'd seen or been on them kind of jumps. So it was great. It was the only one I knew of. But I used to go up and down the railway track anyway. But then I spotted it, you know, the BMX track, and thought, oh. So I started going to it. But then you start knowing about other things with the YMCA, like I said, the roller disco. I used to go to that as well.
Well, my clear memory is the fact that we had a chief executive who unfortunately was off sick for quite a lot of the time, and it caused great problems because there was no leader for all these staff that Pat's mentioned, because it was a big staff team, and it was getting more and more social work orientated rather than just running a hostel. I think there was a transition, wasn't there, Pat, from being a hostel to being a community where people had to be looked after and all this sort of thing.
But when I started, it wasn't a social hostel at all, really. It was mainly for students, and they had a lot of students from the British Council that were funded by the British Council, and it was a place that students could afford to stay in. And then it got so that because of all the grants to all sorts of people, they couldn't afford to stay here anymore. When I started, it was primarily, I would have thought, a student hostel.
For people who were in full-time education or employment, and that differed significantly from what we were doing here. So it was an adjunct to what we were doing.
And it was one of the reasons that place was suitable was because it was near to places of employment and education. Yeah, they could go out to. And the
ideal was that we would fulfil the foyer's purpose with their centre, which was very successful. All the rooms were full. And then as people graduated from there to standing on their own 2 feet and moving away, say, from education or apprenticeships, that would create space, and we hoped it would motivate people from here to want to go there. And that largely happened. Whenever vacancies came up, people moved from here.
In 2017, YMCA Humber is hopeful that we will see the building and development of its proposed Trinity Campus project. The idea is to move away from the traditional housing projects to one of a university-style campus where young people can truly belong, contribute and thrive. From modest beginnings at the prayer meetings above James Kirkby Wriggle's grocer's shop in Grimsby in 1882, through the formal founding of the Grimsby Association by Fred Bacon in 1906, YMCA remains one of the region's most well-known charities and continues to support vulnerable young people in our communities to this day. To find out more about YMCA Humber's work, please visit their website, ymca-humber.com, or visit them on social media. You can find them on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at YMCA Humber.